That afternoon, the city murmured on as usual. A gentle breeze swept through the trees lining Lincoln Park, carrying the scent of fresh grass and the laughter of children chasing one another near the fountain. People passed each other, phones pressed to their ears, earbuds tucked in, as if everyone was busy with their own private world. And in the midst of all that bustling rhythm of life, there was him. Bernard, a tall, slender black man, wearing a faded olive military jacket, worn-out dusty shoes, and a baseball cap washed pale by time. He sat quietly on a wooden bench near the oldest oak tree in the park, his spot. Every afternoon, no one competed for it. No one even noticed. Bernard's hand rested gently on his knee, fingers calloused by time and by years of holding a rifle in the jungles of Asia. His eyes were half closed, but he wasn't asleep. Those eyes had once stared wide through fire and bullets, had once dried out from witnessing comrades fall, and now they followed a darting squirrel as if watching a film of his own life. People passed him. Some looked, then quickly turned away. Some didn't even glance. To them, he was just another old stranger sitting in silence, like a forgotten lamppost. A piece of outdated memory nobody cared to recall. But Bernard didn't mind. He didn't blame them. He had long grown used to being invisible. A young boy ran past, dropping his ice cream near Bernard's feet. Bernard bent down, picked it up, and handed it back. "Thank you, sir," the boy beamed, then dashed away. Bernard smiled faintly, just for a few seconds, but enough to warm his heart. Then he sat alone again. In his mind, the sound of helicopters still echoed, the scent of gunpowder still lingered, and the cries, both of orders and of pain, still haunted his memory. Every breeze could pull him back to the jungles of Southeast Asia, where every second, every breath might have been the last. He had once been a soldier, had once saved his comrades' lives, had once survived brutal ambushes, had once fought alongside a military dog named Rex, his closest friend, his most loyal companion. Now, he no longer held a gun, no longer had a battlefield, only this park, and this solitary wooden bench, where he tried to reclaim the parts of himself that the world had forgotten. A woman walked by with her dog. She glanced at him, hesitated, then turned away. A group of college students laughed loudly nearby. One of them smirked in his direction. Bernard simply bowed his head. He didn't need pity, only quiet, a place to breathe, to remember, and if he were lucky, to be seen, even just once, as someone who still existed. But Bernard had no idea that in just a few moments, that quiet would be shattered by the sound of boots pounding the pavement and the barking of a dog. An ordinary afternoon was about to become an evening the whole city would never forget. The sun still hovered above the treetops, but darkness had already begun to creep into the eyes of those entering the park. Not the darkness of twilight, but something that came from suspicion, from prejudice, and it was directed at Bernard. Footsteps echoed in unison, 3 police officers walking toward him. First was Officer Riley, the youngest, his gaze cold and sharp, as if stepping into a major arrest. Beside him was Dalton, older, broad-shouldered, seemingly less aggressive but still uneasy. The third, Officer Martinez, was a woman with her hair tied back tightly, a stern face, eyes scanning with scrutiny. Bernard spotted them from afar. He sat up straighter, the instinct of a Marine still lived in him, even after all these decades. But he wasn't afraid. He was just ready. Riley was the first to speak. "It's getting late. What are you doing here, sir?" His voice was cold as steel. Bernard looked at him calmly. "I'm just sitting, like I do every afternoon." Martinez stepped forward, her tone slightly softer, but still full of interrogation. "Someone filed a complaint about you being here too long. Some people feel unsafe." "Unsafe?" Bernard raised an eyebrow, a faint, bitter smile on his lips. "Because I'm sitting quietly on a bench?" Dalton interjected, his voice hesitant. "We're just conducting a routine check. Do you have any ID on you, sir?" Bernard sighed. He pulled from his pocket an old, worn wallet. Dalton opened it, pausing at a faded plastic card. The tiny, trembling letters beneath the plastic read, U.S. Marine Corps, Bernard E. Washington, retired. Dalton froze. Officer Martinez looked over his shoulder, her eyes softening slightly. "You served?" Martinez asked, her voice quieter now. Bernard nodded, his gaze steady. Vietnam. 5th Marine Regiment, 1969 to 1972. A brief silence hung in the air. Riley clenched his fists. He didn't like situations that veered off script. Even if you're a veteran. Sir, you can't stay here indefinitely. Park closes at 6. Bernard stared directly at him. I just want some peace and quiet. A nearby child paused mid-kick with his soccer ball, watching curiously. A mother walking her daughter stopped, gripping her child's hand tighter. An older man in a red cap nearby murmured under his breath, "Leave the man be." But the three officers didn't back down. Dalton returned the wallet, his expression now conflicted. Yet Riley stepped in closer, his voice sharper. "We're not asking you to leave, sir, but if you don't have a clear reason for being here, we're within our rights to ask you to move." Bernard sat motionless. A lifetime spent fighting under a flag, and now he wasn't allowed to sit beneath a tree where he once found peace. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He just clenched his hands lightly, eyes deep with 1,000 silent sorrows. "I once carried wounded brothers through gunfire. Now I'm just asking for a few quiet minutes. Is that really a problem?" Riley was about to respond, when a voice rang out unexpectedly. "Stop." A tall man, wearing an old military cap, stepped forward slowly. His eyes blazed as they locked on Bernard. And then he said, like thunder under a clear sky, "This man is a hero. He's not a stranger. He's the man who saved my life at Khe Sanh." The entire park seemed to freeze. Bernard looked at the man, voice trembling slightly. "Clarence?" The veteran, Clarence, nodded, eyes brimming with tears. "We haven't even begun to understand his story," he said, turning to the officers. "But if you let that dog loose, you have no idea what might happen next." And they didn't know, not yet, that the old veteran wasn't bluffing. Because Rex, the hardened K-9 once trained in the fiercest conditions, was now stepping out from the corner of the park. And fate was about to turn the entire story upside down. The air in the park thickened. Everyone held their breath as hurried footsteps echoed from the stone path behind the trees. Another officer approached, holding the leash of a large K-9 unit. It was Officer Matthews, the dog handler on duty that day. The dog, a German shepherd named Rex, walked beside his handler with a powerful gait. Sharp eyes, ears perked, his entire body tense like a living arrow. Those who had witnessed Rex in action knew, once given the signal, he never stopped. Officer Riley pointed at Bernard. "We warned him. He's not cooperating. Matthews, get Rex ready." Officer Matthews frowned, uncertain about the situation, but under pressure from his fellow officers and the growing crowd, he tightened his grip on the leash, preparing the command. Bernard stood still, silent, as a breeze brushed past his worn olive jacket. Clarence stepped forward, arm outstretched, blocking the dog's path. "You don't understand who this man is." "Stop," Clarence growled, but Officer Riley didn't listen. He lowered his voice and ordered, "Loosen the leash. Let Rex handle it." Matthews hesitated for a beat, then reluctantly loosened the tether. Rex immediately lunged forward. A few people screamed. Children clung to their mothers. A boy dropped his orange soccer ball, it rolled across the grass. But then, just a few steps away from Bernard, Rex suddenly stopped. His body remained taut, but there was no growling, no aggression, just stillness. He stood frozen, eyes locked onto Bernard, not like prey, but as if something deeper was being recognized. Bernard slowly sat down, extending his hand, palm open. "Rex," he whispered, voice trembling, "is that you?" And then, a miracle happened. Rex whimpered, a soft sound never found in any K-9 training manual. He took a step forward, then another, not charging but slowly, shakily, his head lowered, eyes never leaving Bernard's. Bernard swallowed back tears. "I thought you were gone." Rex reached him, and as if a dam of memory had burst, he pressed his head into Bernard's chest, whimpering softly, tail wagging slowly like he was crying with joy. The entire park fell silent. Clarence wept openly. The crowd stood stunned. One officer took a step back, his arms limp at his sides. Officer Matthews stammered, This can't be. Rex has never done this with anyone." Bernard wrapped his arms around Rex, his hands trembling as they buried into the thick fur. He murmured, In the middle of that hellish jungle. You dragged me out of fire. You're the reason I'm alive. Rex whimpered again, like a child reunited with family after decades of being lost. Officer Riley stepped back, face pale. What is this? Clarence stepped forward, his voice deep like an undercurrent. That's called heart. The thing you forgot to wear with your uniform. A nearby child tugged at his mother's sleeve. Mom, did the dog remember him? The mother wiped her tears and nodded. Yes, sweetheart. He didn't forget the one who once saved his life. And in that embrace, between an old soldier and the dog once thought to have left the battlefield behind, the entire park realized, there are things that rise above rules. They are loyalty, memory, and a kind of survival no one understands, except them. The atmosphere in the park, after the miraculous moment between Bernard and Rex, was no longer one of suspicion, but of awe, emotion, and awakening. Clarence, Bernard's old comrade from the war, stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. I knew you were still out there somewhere, Bernard, but I never imagined it would be Rex. That same dog. Bernard nodded slightly, eyes reddened. He saved my life, once, and now, he's done it again. Officer Matthews was still standing nearby, eyes fixed on Rex, now sitting obediently next to Bernard. His expression no longer alert, but soft and glowing like that of a child who's just found a lost family member. He's never done this before, Matthews said, voice hoarse. Rex is tactical, trained to never let his guard down for even a second. But today, he chose love over command. And that was the moment the change began. From a nearby bench, an elderly woman with silver hair slowly stood up and walked toward Bernard. Pinned to her chest was a small badge with the American flag and the words, Gold Star Mother. You're a Marine? She asked. Eyes misty. Bernard nodded. She gently took his hand. My son was a soldier too. He didn't make it back. But if he had, I imagine he'd be sitting here like you, quietly. Unnoticed. Thank you, for living on for those who couldn't. A round of applause broke out. It began with a young man in the back row. Then another. Then the whole park joined in, softly. Sincerely, not out of ceremony. But as an honest recognition. At that moment, young Malik, the boy who had first witnessed the miracle, stepped forward. His sneakers were worn from playing ball. Mr. Bernard, you're the first person I've ever seen get hugged by a police dog. I never believed in miracles. Not until right now. Bernard smiled gently, placing a hand on Malik's shoulder. Miracles don't fall from the sky, son. They come from memory and loyalty. Far off, Officer Riley, whose face had once been hardened by prejudice, now bowed his head and quietly stepped back. The community began to move. But this time, not to keep their distance, but to draw near. A pregnant woman approached with her husband. Tearfully. We want our child to grow up in a world where men like you are not forgotten. A group of other veterans, alerted by phone, had arrived, some with crutches, some in faded uniforms, surrounding Bernard. They didn't need to speak. They just stood there, a living wall between Bernard and the world that had once overlooked him. A district official, whom no one had noticed until now, stepped out from the crowd. On behalf of this city, I want to apologize for forgetting that men like you still exist. And I promise, we'll do better. Clarence gripped Bernard's hand. You see, brother, just one moment, and people remember compassion. Bernard's eyes welled again, his hand still resting on Rex's back. I don't need medals. Just a place to sit in peace. After the unimaginable embrace between Bernard and Rex, the ripple of that moment spread across the city like fire touching dry grass. Videos of it were uploaded online within minutes, but not to spark outrage. Like so many viral clips, this time, people cried. He just wanted peace. The dog recognized his old comrade. Unbelievable. This is the America I want to see. Thousands of comments poured in. In a single day, Bernard, a man who had lived like a shadow, became a living symbol of something simple: recognition. The next morning, Bernard wasn't sitting alone on his familiar wooden bench in the park. Clarence was already there, holding an old military cap, neatly folded and clean. We've got company, he said, squinting toward the gate. A black SUV pulled up. Out stepped the mayor and several senior officials. No barricades, no microphones, just people awakened by what they had seen the night before. Mr. Bernard, The mayor began, her voice soft and unadorned. I come not as a leader, but as someone who's been silent for too long. She bowed her head. I'm sorry. Bernard stood still. In his eyes, there was no bitterness, only the calm of a man who had seen far worse. Thank you, he said, but that apology isn't for me alone. There are many like me, still forgotten. The mayor nodded, then gestured to the wooden bench, where the story had begun. We want to change that. With your permission, we'd like to place a plaque, not just to honor you, but to remind this city. Everyone deserves to be seen. Bernard turned to look at Rex, the dog now resting his head on Bernard's lap. Eyes closed as if dreaming of days long gone. As long as that bench stays open to anyone who needs peace. Bernard said. Then I agree. A few days later, the park held a small ceremony. No red ribbons, no giant flags, just veterans sitting quietly in the front row. Malik and a group of teens from the basketball court, dressed in fresh clothes. The mother and her little girl, bringing a bottle of water and a basket of cookies. And of course, Rex, proudly wearing a badge on his collar that read, Former K9 Honorary Comrade. Clarence stood beside Bernard, giving him a gentle pat on the back as the crowd applauded. I know you never wanted to be a hero, he whispered, but the world needs reminders that sometimes, heroes just want to sit quietly on an old bench. The honorary ceremony had passed, but its resonance lingered in everyone's heart, especially Bernard's. In the days that followed, the park was no longer a place of solitude, but a place of gathering. Strangers stopped to shake his hand. Children came to pet Rex. And young people like Malik, who once saw the world through a lens of skepticism, now sat for hours, just to listen to Bernard's stories. But one morning, as dew still clung to the grass, Officer Matthews, Rex's handler, approached Bernard with a heavy look on his face. Mr. Bernard, I need to talk to you. Bernard tilted his head, his quiet eyes waiting. Matthews sat down beside him on the familiar wooden bench. Rex lay curled beneath Bernard's legs, eyes half closed but ears alert. Always listening. Rex has completed his full term of service, Matthews said, his voice thick. Soon, by regulation, he'll be retired. He paused. The thing is, we need to find him a home. Bernard looked down at the animal sleeping beneath his feet, that face. That body, once hurled into gunfire to save lives. Once able to smell death in the wind, and now, only hoping for a quiet corner. I understand, Bernard said slowly. He gave everything. Now it's time for us to give back. Matthews hesitated. We have a list of families ready to adopt. But, Rex already chose, didn't he? Both Matthews and Bernard looked down just as Rex, as if fully grasping the conversation, rested his muzzle on Bernard's knee. His tail gently wagging, eyes closed and calm but full of trust. The answer was clear. The following week, a rare procedure was signed right there in the park. Rex was officially adopted as a legal member of Bernard's household. No press arrived. No formal event took place. Only this. An old man, with calloused hands and a heart once shattered. A loyal dog, who had braved fire and never stopped standing guard. And a community, no longer strangers, but witnesses to something extraordinary. A veteran once forgotten, now had a family. A few weeks after Rex officially became a member of Bernard's family, the park was no longer just a place for him to quietly withdraw from the world. It had become a place people came to listen, and Bernard, with his deep, calm voice and eyes full of experience, had become a living storyteller of an era the younger generation only knew from textbooks. Every afternoon, Bernard would sit on his familiar wooden bench, Rex curled up by his feet, silent like a bodyguard or a witness. Children began to gather around him, not out of curiosity, but out of a hunger to understand. One day, Malik, the teenager who had witnessed the reunion between Bernard and Rex, arrived with a notebook in hand and asked, Uncle Bernard, can you tell us about the first time you met Rex? Back in the war? Bernard smiled, gently patted Rex's head, and began. Back then, I was wounded, losing blood, left in the jungle. Everyone thought I wouldn't make it. Until I heard the lightest footsteps, then the breath, familiar. Steady. Rex didn't bark, didn't whimper. He just stood there, eyes locked on mine. And then, he pulled me out of hell. His voice faltered, but Rex, as if understanding the story, gently rested his head on Bernard's leg, as if to say, "It's true." From then on, each day brought more children, more friends. People who once passed by now stopped. A small circle began to form, and Bernard, who once felt invisible, became a landmark in this city. Officer Riley, who had once ordered Bernard out of the park, also came by. No longer in uniform, he sat among the kids, listening with a gratitude he didn't try to hide. Sometimes, he even retold things he'd learned from Bernard, about patience, about judgment, and about the things people failed to see with their eyes. Rex was no longer a K-9 officer. But in the eyes of the children, he was a living hero. A loyal companion. A silent symbol of forgiveness, memory, and unconditional loyalty. And Bernard, he never tried to become a symbol. He just lived truthfully. But that truth itself lit a flame of hope in those who had once lost it. One late afternoon at the end of the month, an overcast sky cast long shadows over the park where Bernard and Rex usually sat. The air carried the quiet chill of approaching autumn, but inside Bernard, a strange unease was rising. Rex lay still at his feet as usual, ears twitching gently at the footsteps passing through the park. Then Bernard heard shouting, not loud, but raw, hoarse, and wounded. From behind a bush, a boy of about 13 came running out, his clothes disheveled, face flushed with a mix of rage and shame. Behind him were 3 other boys, hurling cruel insults. "Trash. You don't belong here. This place isn't for your kind." Each word sliced into Bernard's memory, echoes of what he'd once heard back home after returning from war. When people looked at his black military uniform not with respect, but with suspicion and coldness. Without hesitation, Bernard stood, gently tightening his grip on Rex's leash. "Hey, boys," he said, not loud, but with weight. "Why do you have to hurt others just to feel bigger?" The 3 boys froze. One of them recognized Bernard. "That's the old guy with the weird dog." Rex let out a low growl, not threatening, just enough to make them step back. Bernard stepped forward and crouched beside the tearful boy. "What's your name, son?" "Micah," the boy choked out. "I was just eating lunch on the bench. But they made me leave." Bernard nodded and invited Micah to sit with him. The other boys hesitated, then walked off, confused, but no longer aggressive. That afternoon, the park witnessed a rare conversation between a man once rejected by society and a boy just beginning to understand his worth. Bernard told Micah stories of young black soldiers once treated as invisible, who still fought for a country they weren't sure they belonged to. "Do you know why I still sit on this bench, Micah? Because it's peaceful here?" "No, Micah, because sometimes, just being in a place where others think you don't belong, is the quietest way to prove you do." Micah sat in silence for a long time. Then he reached down and gently patted Rex's head, as if he'd found a wordless friend. The next day, Micah returned, not alone, but with his mother, a tired but deeply grateful woman. She grasped Bernard's hand. "You were the first person to ask my son what happened, not what he did wrong." From that day on, a small wooden plaque was fixed behind the bench where Bernard always sat. The words were carved deep. "Don't ask what they're doing here. Ask what they've overcome just to sit here." The early winter wind had begun to sweep through the park, carrying a quiet chill that slipped into every branch and blade of grass. Bernard sat on his usual bench, his old coat pulled higher than usual. But today, something was different, not in the weather, but in Rex. The old dog lay curled up at Bernard's feet, no longer lifting his head at the sound of passing strangers. His breathing was heavy, his eyes duller, lacking their usual fire. Bernard leaned down, gently stroking the thick fur that had thinned with time. "What's wrong, my friend?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Not now, don't leave me yet." That night, Bernard carried Rex home, to the small, modest apartment where black and white photographs hung on the walls. A young soldier smiling beside his military dog. A middle-aged man standing with fellow veterans. And in the center of all of them was Rex, always there, like a vital thread woven through Bernard's life. He called the vet. The doctor arrived quietly, examined Rex thoroughly, then said gently, "Mr. Bernard, Rex is very old. His kidneys are failing. His joints hurt. He may not make it through this winter." The words struck Bernard like a bullet piercing the armor of endurance he'd worn his whole life. That night, Bernard didn't sleep. He sat beside Rex, never letting go of him. Memories flooded back like a tide. In Vietnam, it was Rex who had found him beneath a blanket of leaves after an ambush. Rex had dragged him from the fire, led rescuers to him, and for months afterward, it was Rex's silent companionship that got him through invisible nightmares. "You saved me from the war. From loneliness. From darkness," Bernard sobbed. "How do I save you now?" The next morning, Bernard returned to the park, this time carrying a thick blanket, a thermos of warm water, and Rex, wrapped securely in his arms. The regulars noticed the change. Bernard's face remained strong, but his eyes had darkened. Malik, the teenager who once shook his hand, approached. "What's wrong with Mr. Rex?" he asked softly. Bernard replied gently, without taking his eyes off Rex. "My warrior is tired." And something remarkable began to happen. People started coming to the bench, not to speak, but to sit beside Bernard. One brought pastries, another, hot tea. Some simply paused to place a hand on his shoulder. Rex lay there, still, but with eyes open, gazing at each person. One by one, a little girl placed a crayon drawing into Bernard's lap, a sketch of an old man smiling beside a dog with bright eyes. "That's Mr. Rex," she said. "I want him to remember that everyone loves him." That weekend night, Bernard slept beside Rex on the long couch in his living room. He told him stories about the people they'd helped, about the children who smiled because of him, about the park where an invisible old soldier became visible again because of a dog. The next morning, when the first light of dawn streamed through the curtain, Bernard felt an absolute stillness. Rex was gone. Bernard didn't cry, not because he wasn't grieving, but because, in that moment, he felt he was holding everything: love, pain, memory, and a quiet release. That morning, the park felt as if it had stopped breathing. A white ribbon was gently tied to the bench where Bernard and Rex had sat every afternoon. Beneath it sat a black and white photograph, Rex staring directly into the camera. His eyes powerful yet gentle. Beside it, a bundle of wildflowers and an old military cap. There were no lengthy speeches, no flags, no trumpet music, but no one present that morning would ever forget it. Bernard entered the park, walking slowly, each step swaying with memory. He wore his old military uniform, perfectly pressed, and in his hands he carried Rex's worn-out leash. All eyes turned to him. But this time, there were no stares of suspicion. Only respect and love. Malik, the boy from the basketball court, led a group of friends to his side. "Sir, may I place the drawing next to Rex?" Bernard nodded, trying to hold a smile though his eyes were already red. Malik gently set the drawing beside the photograph. Underneath it a scribbled message: "Thank you for protecting him. And all of us." Officer Riley, the man who once stood in opposition to Bernard, quietly stepped forward. In his hands, a bouquet of white flowers. "Mr. Bernard," he said, his voice catching, "may I stand here, not as a cop, but as a man who was wrong, and who learned the greatest lesson of his life from you and Rex." Bernard placed his hand on Riley's shoulder. He said nothing, because sometimes forgiveness needs no words. Then, one by one, people began to speak. No one had asked them to. There was no script, only hearts compelled to say something, to Rex, and to Bernard. An elderly gentleman stepped forward. "I was in Haiphong in 1969. I know what it means to carry memories home from war." Rex wasn't just a dog. He was the embodiment of what this world is forgetting: unconditional loyalty. A young teacher raised her hand, trembling. "I teach 4th grade. Next week I'll tell my students about Mr. Bernard and Rex. Not just about war, but about how kindness can begin with one person and ripple through a community." But perhaps the most moving moment came from Riley. He knelt in front of the framed photo, removed his badge from his chest, and placed it gently at the foot of Rex's image. "I don't want to wear this if I don't truly understand what it means. Rex taught me that enforcing the law isn't about commanding. It's about protecting. And sometimes, the very person you doubt is the one who's spent his whole life protecting you." No one spoke. No one moved. Only the sound of a bird cutting across the quiet sky, as if offering a final salute. After the memorial, Bernard stayed behind on the bench. Clarence walked over and sat beside him. "You see that?" he said quietly. "Rex did something we've spent a lifetime trying to do. He made an entire city stop and listen. Bernard gave a faint smile, gripping the old leash tightly in his hands. He's still guarding us, just from somewhere else now. 2 days after the memorial, the city felt different. The story of Bernard and Rex, of the moment a retired soldier was recognized and embraced by a military K-9 under the astonished gaze of the entire park, had spread across social media, newspapers, and national television. Those images weren't just touching. They awakened something. CBS aired a special feature. The anchor's voice trembled as she said, "In a world full of suspicion and division, a veteran and a service dog reminded us of something fundamental. Behind every silent face, there's a story worth hearing." In schools, teachers began introducing Bernard and Rex's story into their lessons. Not as a history lesson, but as a lesson in compassion. At one high school, Malik, the boy who first shook Bernard's hand, was invited to speak during the school's morning assembly. "We used to think old people sitting in the park were just leftovers. But I've learned something from Mr. Bernard and Rex. Don't just look and walk away. Look and step closer." At police stations, training protocols were revised. The lesson from the park would not be forgotten. Officer Riley, once the man who got it wrong, now retold the story to new recruits. "I'm not telling you about an incident. I'm telling you about a man. A man I nearly hurt, because I didn't bother to see who he truly was." A lesson with no curriculum. Only remorse. And growth. Veterans organizations across the U.S. began reaching out to people like Bernard. Those who served, who came home, and quietly disappeared from the spotlight. Now, they were being named, being honored. A movement called, "You Are Not Invisible," was born. The photo of Bernard hugging Rex was printed onto commemorative pins. Etched into each one were the words, "Not forgotten, not alone." Thousands wore them over their hearts. Not for decoration, but as a daily reminder. Some people may not speak, but they lived, and they deserved to be heard. At Lincoln Park, where it all began, more and more people came. Not to take pictures, but to sit. To sit beside the stone bench that had become a symbol. To sit the way Bernard once sat. To sit and remember. To sit and thank. And to learn how to see the world with gentler eyes. Bernard didn't appear often after the memorial. He kept to himself. But he followed everything. And when a little girl knocked on the door of his small apartment one rainy afternoon, and handed him a handwritten note in shaky script. "Dear Mr. Bernard, I've never met you, but I told your story in my writing assignment. My mom says, if you meet someone like you, say thank you by living kindly." "I'll try." Bernard sat down, held the letter close to his heart. Rex lay beside him, his eyes half closed, but knowing. The late autumn sun poured golden honey over Lincoln Park on an early Sunday morning. The trees had turned to amber, and a soft breeze whispered through the familiar bench where Bernard had sat for so many years, unknown in his own city. But today, he was no longer unknown. Hundreds gathered around that very bench. Children held small American flags. Veterans stood in worn uniforms, backs straight, eyes proud. Police officers, some who had once been silent or mistaken, now stood in the front row. Hands over their hearts. A new bronze bust had been placed beside the bench. A silver-haired man, eyes deep with memory, seated, one hand resting gently on the head of a loyal German shepherd. The plaque beneath read, "Bernard and Rex, they served. They remembered. They forgave." The city's mayor stepped up to the podium, her voice thick with emotion. "We often build statues to honor victory. But today, we build one to honor humanity." Mr. Bernard didn't strike down an enemy. He awakened the conscience of a city. Under the trees, the crowd was so silent you could hear the birds singing, as if nature itself paused in reverence. Bernard stepped forward slowly. A simple suit. Rex walked beside him, older now. Slower, but still proud. The entire park rose to their feet. They applauded, not loudly but warmly. Like a long embrace welcoming home a soldier who had been gone too long. Bernard raised the microphone, his voice gravelly but steady. "I once believed I would die and no one would remember I had lived. But that day, when Rex recognized me, when you all stopped to listen, I realized, I am not invisible. And I am not alone." He turned to look at Rex. Then back to the crowd. "I don't want you to remember me through this statue. I want you to remember what happened. When we chose to see one another with our hearts instead of our assumptions. When a dog chose compassion over command. And when a city chose to listen instead of doubt. The applause rose again, longer this time. Malik, the same student from long ago, filmed every moment. A young mother held her daughter and whispered, "Remember this, sweetheart, never walk past someone like they don't exist." After the ceremony, people came to Bernard one by one. With letters, handshakes, and quiet stories. "My father was a soldier too. My son saw your clip and hugged me crying. Thank you for sitting on that bench." And then, like every other evening, Bernard returned to his bench. No longer alone, no longer invisible. He sat. Rex rested his head on Bernard's foot. Birds sang. A soft breeze danced through the trees. Children played soccer under the golden light. That bench, once a refuge for loneliness, had become a symbol of connection. The story of Bernard and Rex didn't end there. It rippled through the air. Through retellings. Through generations. It reminded us that compassion can turn an ordinary afternoon into a legacy. And a forgotten veteran into the man who changed an entire city. There are stories that don't need gunfire to be great. No medals. No towering monuments. Just an old soldier. A dog who never forgot. And a community brave enough to listen and change. Bernard never sought fame. He only wanted a place to sit. To remember. But the moment Rex recognized him, it awakened something deeper in all of us. A lesson in forgiveness, in respect, and in how one small moment can touch the hearts of the world. Have you ever witnessed a moment like that? Share it in the comments below. Because maybe your story could be the light for someone who feels invisible. Don't forget to like if this story touched you. And subscribe so you won't miss the next human journey. As heartfelt as Bernard and Rex. Thank you for being here. See you again in the next story full of humanity.